Hello. For tonight's Grizzly Tale, I'm going to read you a story from Ghastly Tales for Ghastly Kids. These are cautionary tales that I wrote for lovers of squeam. Tonight's story is called A Lesson from History. It was history. Eliza hated history. She'd never known much, and now that it was time for her to sit an exam, she knew even less. "Who was shot in the eye with an arrow?" said her best friend Rachel as they waited outside the exam hall. "Well, I don't know," said Eliza anxiously. "Are you sure this is history?" "Yes, it was Harold," said Rachel. "Harold who?" said Eliza. "Harold the King." "Never heard of him," sulked Eliza. "It's a stupid name for a king anyway." "Don't you know anything?" laughed Rachel. "Not much," said Eliza. "I know when I was born." "No, that doesn't count." "I wish it did," said Eliza. But she only had herself to blame. Eliza had not done a stroke of work in the last year. She had been far too busy hanging around coffee shops and eating huge chocolate eclairs to spend any time swatting up on history. Unfortunately, exams have an unpleasant knack of finding such things out. Miss Panine de Berme, the French teacher who was invigilating the exam, appeared from inside the hall. "We are ready for you now, girls," she said. Eliza cringed. She was going to fail. She knew it. They filed into the exam hall like a pack of frightened lemmings rushing towards the edge of a cliff, heads down, palms sweating, lucky mascots clutched feverishly to their breasts. I've never actually seen a lemming on the edge of a cliff clutching a lucky mascot to its breast, but I have it on good authority that the majority of them do. Gonks with green hair are a particular favourite, I believe. If fear could be bottled and sold for lots of money in the shops, then the place to start bottling it would surely have been the school hall, where Eliza and Rachel were about to sit their history exam. "You have exactly 3 hours to complete your paper," declared Miss Panine de Berme, when they had all found their seats and laid out their pens and pencils in regimented lines. "You may look at the questions maintenant." There was a flurry of activity as 150 pieces of paper were turned at the same time. Then there was 1 minute of complete silence while 150 pairs of eyes scanned the questions. Then there was another frantic commotion as 149 girls unscrewed their pen tops and started writing. The 150th girl looked at the others and bit her lip. "Oh, crikey," she thought. "I wish I'd done a bit more homework." Eliza could not answer even one of the 14 questions. In such circumstances one must remain calm. Eliza read the questions for a second time and sat back to think deeply. Then she sat forward and leant on her elbows. She gazed at the ceiling, out of the window, at everyone else scribbling madly, then back at the exam paper. Then she had an idea. She read the questions again, just in case they had miraculously changed since she had last looked. They hadn't. Of course they hadn't. They looked just as impossible now as they had 5 minutes before. But perhaps it was her pen that was stopping her from knowing the answers. She swapped it from her right hand to her left. No difference. She put the lid in her mouth and waited for inspiration. But sadly it didn't come. So she put the nib in her mouth and covered her lips with blue ink. She hadn't meant to do that. That was stupid. Still, it gave her something to do for the next 10 minutes as she tried to rub the ink off her tongue. Rachel, who seemed to be writing faster than anyone else, looked up from her paper and gave Eliza the thumbs up. Eliza had never before hated anyone quite as much as she hated Rachel at that moment. Smug friends who knew the answers were no friends of Eliza. They were just swats, teachers' pets, who deserved to have their knickers run up the flagpole in front of the whole school. "Eliza?" said a voice. Eliza looked up sharply and whipped her legs off the desk. "Yes, Mr. Burm," she said. But Mr. Burm was at the other end of the hall, walking in the other direction. "Eliza," said the voice again. "What?" replied Eliza in a loud whisper. "Over here," said the voice. Eliza turned to where the voice had come from. The fire exit doors stood ajar, and poking her head through the gap was a little girl with short black hair and freckles. She was wearing a brown pinafore dress, black woolen stockings, and a pair of lace-up booties. "I'm Penny," said the girl with freckles. "I'm Eliza," said Eliza. "What you doing?" said the newcomer. "History," said Eliza. "Oh, yuck," said Penny. "Do you want any help?" Miss Paninda Burm's voice boomed out from the front of the hall. "Eliza!" "Quick, hide!" said Eliza, pushing Penny underneath her desk. "If Mr. Burm finds you here, she'll send you to the sin bin." "Stop talking!" shouted the French teacher. "Oh, relax," said Penny. "She can't see me." "Oh, this is no time for jokes," whispered Eliza, who was now in a panic. Mr. Burm was steering a direct course for her desk. "No, she can't, honest," laughed Penny, as she got up from the floor, waved her arms in the air and sang the bit from Frere Jacques about soggy semolina. Mr. Burm was now only feet away. Eliza buried her head in her work and pretended that Penny wasn't there. "Any more talking, and I shall send you to the headmistress, you naughty girl," said Mr. Burm, glaring down at Eliza. Penny had crept behind the teacher's back and was pulling faces. Eliza winced. "What are you looking at?" said Mr. Burm, turning round sharply. She was staring straight at Penny now. Penny lifted her skirt and showed the teacher her belly button. "Nothing," said Eliza weakly. "Good," said Mr. Burm, flouncing off down the aisle. "Then get on with your work." When Eliza opened her eyes, Penny was sitting next to her. She was grinning mischievously from ear to ear. "She didn't see you!" exclaimed Eliza. "Well, I told you she wouldn't," said Penny. "But why?" "'Cause I come from another world," said Penny. Eliza was not sure what this meant. "You mean you come from another school?" "No, dunderhead, I'm a ghost," said Penny. You could have knocked Eliza down with a feather. "Well, how long have you been dead?" she said. "Well, about 100 years," replied Penny. Then she added, "I used to be a pupil at this school, you know, until it burnt down." "Well, I didn't know the school had burnt down." "Oh, yeah, about 100 years ago, during exam week." "Do you mean—" Eliza couldn't quite say it. "Do you mean that you, as it were, actually died in the fire?" "During the history exam," said Penny. Eliza pricked up her ears. Penny carried on. "So every year during the history exam, I have to come back here and do a bit of haunting." "Oh, how awful for you," said Eliza. "Oh, I don't know," said Penny. "Could be worse." "Well, how?" Eliza asked. "Well, it could be geography," said the ghost. "I'm useless at geography." She paused to think. "I'm pretty good at history, though." "Well, you would be," said Eliza, who was getting quite excited as a cheaty sort of thought took shape in her mind. "How many times have you sat this history exam?" "Well, 100, of course," said Penny. "Do you want me to help you?" "Not half," shouted Eliza. Miss Paninda Burm looked round.
but we better do it quietly.
Eliza sat back and let Penny answer her history exam for her. Penny wrote fast and with great assurance. With half an hour to spare, she handed the paper back to Eliza and announced that she had finished. "You're brilliant," squealed Eliza. "I'm exhausted," said Penny. "See you next year." Then she stood up and disappeared back through the fire exit whence she had come. A week later, the exam results were pinned to the notice board. Eliza was bursting to know how she'd done. If Penny had sat the exam 100 times before, it was a cast iron certainty that Eliza was going to come top. A crowd had gathered in front of the results board. Eliza shoved her way to the front and cast her eyes up to the top of the list. First place, Rachel Smith, 98%, it said. Oh, so she hadn't come first. Eliza was a little disappointed, but second place would do. Second place, Tanya Wilkins, 91%. She wasn't second either. In fact, she wasn't third, fourth, fifth, or even sixth. Right at the bottom, in last place, she read the impossible. 32nd place, Eliza McGregor, 0%. Eliza was stunned. Well, it hadn't crossed her mind that Penny's ghost might be just as lazy and stupid as she was. Unfortunately, though, it was.